I never asked for much in life. After years of wading through the blood-soaked sands of foreign wars, after staring down the barrels of enemies who saw me as nothing more than a target to eliminate, I just wanted peace. Quiet. A chance to breathe without the weight of the world on my shoulders. But even that modest dream was too much to ask for. My name is Malcolm Hayes, and if you're looking for a hero, you've got the wrong man. I'm no savior, I'm a soldier. A Delta Force operative trained to dismantle threats before they could take their next breath. In the field, I was untouchable, a ghost moving through shadows, leaving chaos in my wake. Yet here, in this so-called land of the free, I found myself shackled by something far more insidious than any bullet or bomb: fear. Not fear for myself, no, I left that emotion behind long ago, but fear for those I cared about. Rex, my German shepherd, wasn't just a dog. He was my brother in arms, my confidant, the one constant in a life defined by uncertainty. He had been with me through deployments, through sleepless nights haunted by the faces of men I'd put down, through the endless parade of strangers' eyes judging me because of the color of my skin. Together, we carved out a fragile semblance of normalcy. Walks around the neighborhood, the rhythmic tap of Rex's paws against the pavement, the crisp scent of freshly cut grass, it was enough. Or so I thought. The truth is, there's no escaping the battlefield. Not really. Even when you hang up the uniform, even when you bury your weapons deep in the recesses of your closet, the fight follows you home. It lurks in the wary glances of neighbors, in the way some clutch their purses tighter when you pass, in the unspoken assumption that you don't belong. And then it rears its ugly head in ways you can't prepare for, shattering the illusion of safety you worked so hard to build. That's what they did. Those two officers, they didn't just cross a line. They obliterated it. They made me realize that no matter how far I ran, no matter how quiet I stayed, the war would always find me. The sun had barely begun its descent, casting a golden hue over the quiet suburban streets, when Malcolm Hayes stepped out for what should have been an ordinary evening walk with Rex. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of freshly mowed grass and distant laughter from neighboring homes. It was supposed to be simple, a moment of peace after months spent overseas in high-stakes security operations. But as Malcolm strolled down the pavement, Rex's steady gait matching his own, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He'd felt it before, that prickling sensation at the back of his neck, like eyes boring into him from somewhere unseen. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival instinct, an ingrained reflex honed by years on battlefields where danger lurked in every shadow. And then they appeared, Officers Gregory Calloway and Anthony Miller, rolling up slowly in their cruiser, headlights cutting through the dimming light. At first glance, the scene seemed innocuous enough, a routine patrol stop perhaps. But Malcolm knew better. These weren't men patrolling for safety. These were predators circling prey. From the moment Calloway leaned out of the window, his voice dripping with condescension, Malcolm understood this wasn't about law enforcement, it was about power. "You live around here?" Calloway asked, his tone casual but laced with accusation. Malcolm answered calmly, politely, offering his address without hesitation. Yet politeness only seemed to infuriate them further. Their questions grew sharper, more invasive, each word designed to chip away at his dignity. They questioned why he didn't look like someone who belonged in the neighborhood, implying he was an outsider, a threat. When Malcolm stood firm, refusing to cower under their scrutiny, the tension escalated. Miller stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the pavement, positioning himself just close enough to intimidate. His hand hovered near his holster, not quite drawing his weapon yet, but the message was clear. This wasn't a conversation, it was a display of dominance. Rex sensed it too. The German shepherd, trained to read body language and detect hostility, shifted slightly, his ears perking up, muscles coiled beneath his sleek coat. Malcolm tightened his grip on the leash ever so slightly, whispering softly, "Easy, boy." But Miller misinterpreted the movement, or perhaps he didn't care. With a sneer, he barked, "Control your damn dog." And then it happened. As Rex instinctively moved forward to shield Malcolm, Miller drew his gun, not to threaten, not to warn, but to fire. A single deafening shot rang out, shattering the tranquility of the evening. Rex collapsed, blood pooling beneath him, his loyal brown eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Malcolm froze, his world imploding in that instant. The leash slipped from his fingers as he dropped to his knees beside Rex, cradling the dying animal in his arms. His heart pounded, rage and grief colliding inside him like a storm ready to erupt. Calloway smirked, leaning casually against the hood of the cruiser, while Miller holstered his weapon as if nothing significant had occurred. "Should have kept him under control," Miller muttered, his voice dismissive, cruel. For Malcolm, time seemed to slow. Every second stretched into eternity as he stared at Rex, whose breathing grew labored, shallow. His mind raced, grappling with disbelief, fury, and hopelessness. How could they? How dare they? In that moment, Malcolm realized something crucial. These men weren't just officers abusing their authority. They were cowards hiding behind badges, believing themselves untouchable. Rex's final whimper pierced the air, and Malcolm clenched his fists, vowing silently that justice would come not through courts or systems, but through vengeance. The days that followed Rex's death were a blur of grief and rage for Malcolm. Each breath felt like dragging shards of glass through his lungs, every heartbeat a reminder of the void left behind. He had lost comrades before on battlefields and ambushes, but this was different. Rex wasn't just another soldier. He was family. And now, because of two men who hid behind badges, that bond had been ripped away. At first, Malcolm clung to the hope that justice would come through official channels. He filed complaints, spoke to lawyers, and even reached out to internal affairs. But as the days turned into weeks, it became painfully clear no one cared. The system wasn't broken, it was complicit. Every door he knocked on slammed shut in his face, every plea met with indifference or thinly veiled hostility. Malcolm knew then that if he wanted justice, he'd have to take it himself. Drawing upon years of tactical training from Delta Force, he began crafting a plan so precise it could dismantle an entire enemy battalion. This wasn't war, but it might as well have been. His targets weren't insurgents or terrorists, they were worse. They were predators hiding in plain sight, preying on the vulnerable under the guise of authority. Malcolm started small, observing Calloway and Miller's routines. He learned their habits, their weaknesses, their vices. Late-night drinking at seedy bars, reckless driving, extramarital affairs, it all painted a picture of men who believed themselves untouchable. But Malcolm saw cracks beneath their bravado, fissures he could exploit. Yet, the deeper he dug, the more dangerous things became. Word spread quickly among the precinct about that guy who wouldn't let go of his dead dog. Threats arrived in whispers from colleagues of Calloway and Miller, warning him to back off. One night, as Malcolm walked home from reviewing surveillance footage, a group of shadowy figures cornered him in an alleyway. Their eyes gleamed with malice, their knuckles wrapped in brass. "You think you're tough?" One sneered, stepping closer. Malcolm didn't flinch. Years of combat instinct kicked in, and within moments, they were sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain. But the message was clear. These men weren't just bullies, they were cowards willing to cross any line to protect their own. Despite the risks, Malcolm pressed on. He installed hidden cameras outside his house, planted microphones in strategic locations, and meticulously documented every interaction with Calloway and Miller. What he uncovered went far beyond what he'd imagined. Falsified reports, evidence tampering, systematic abuse masked by bureaucratic red tape. It wasn't just corruption, it was a cancer eating away at the soul of the department. With each piece of evidence, Malcolm's resolve hardened. These men wouldn't simply lose their jobs. They would pay for what they'd done. For Rex. For everyone they'd hurt. Justice wasn't coming, it was already here, and Malcolm Hayes was its instrument. The evidence Malcolm had gathered wasn't just damning for Calloway and Miller. It was a ticking time bomb that threatened to obliterate the entire foundation of corruption within the local police department. Every file, every email, every grainy video clip he released painted an undeniable picture of systemic abuse, cover-ups, and unchecked power. He didn't stop at exposing their violent arrests or falsified reports. He went deeper, unearthing years of misconduct buried beneath bureaucratic red tape. Names of higher-ranking officers who had sanctioned illegal raids, ignored complaints, and even orchestrated smear campaigns against whistleblowers began surfacing online. The media exploded with outrage as journalists dissected the leaks. Activists rallied outside precincts, and hashtags demanding accountability trended nationwide. But while the public clamored for justice, the fallout hit Malcolm like a storm surge. Within hours of releasing the first batch of emails, his phone buzzed incessantly, not with messages of support, but with veiled threats from unknown numbers. "You think you're untouchable?" One text read, followed by a blurry photo of him walking into his apartment building. It wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching him. That night, as he sat in his dimly lit living room reviewing footage of yet another incriminating interaction between Calloway and their superior officer, the sound of screeching tires outside snapped him to attention. Peering through the blinds, he saw two shadowy figures lingering near his car, their faces obscured by hoods. They weren't there to deliver flowers. Malcolm's instincts screamed danger, but instead of panicking, he moved methodically. Grabbing a flashlight and his pistol, he secured the house, ensuring every lock was bolted, every blind drawn. These men weren't amateurs, they were enforcers sent to silence him permanently. Days later, the pressure mounted. A fire broke out in the storage unit where he kept backup copies of his files, destroying critical documents. Anonymous tips flooded local news outlets claiming Malcolm had fabricated the evidence, planting doubts among viewers eager to see him discredited. Even worse, whispers spread among criminals linked to the corrupt officers, violent individuals now convinced. Malcolm was meddling in affairs far above his pay grade. One evening, as he reviewed surveillance footage of Calloway meeting with a known drug runner, a brick shattered his front window, narrowly missing his head. Attached was a note, "Stop digging." Malcolm clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as adrenaline coursed through him. If they thought fear would deter him, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Malcolm understood the stakes better than anyone. This wasn't just about taking down two rogue cops anymore, it was war. And wars weren't fought alone. Determined not to back down, he reached out to trusted allies, investigative journalists hungry for truth, attorneys willing to challenge the system, and community leaders desperate for change. Together, they amplified his message, ensuring the firestorm couldn't be contained. For every threat hurled his way, Malcolm responded with more revelations, each drop of information fueling the inferno consuming the corrupt institution. Yet, despite the growing peril, he remained resolute. Justice wasn't optional, it was inevitable. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Malcolm Hayes knew he wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for Rex. The air crackled with tension as the defense team unleashed their arsenal of accusations, painting Malcolm as a dangerous vigilante consumed by vengeance. "You see, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lead attorney began, his voice dripping with disdain, "this man isn't here because he seeks truth or accountability. He's here because he hates authority, because he believes himself above the law. His words hung heavy in the room, designed to chip away at Malcolm's credibility, to make him appear unstable, unhinged. But Malcolm sat still, his posture unwavering, his expression unreadable. Years of combat training had taught him how to endure far worse than verbal assaults. When it came time for cross-examination, the lawyer circled Malcolm like a predator sizing up its prey. "Isn't it true, Mr. Hayes, that you've been involved in numerous altercations over the years? That your so-called training has made you a threat to society?" Each question was a dagger meant to wound, each pause an attempt to unnerve. Yet Malcolm didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel. "My training taught me discipline. It taught me restraint. And most importantly, it taught me honor, something your clients clearly lack." The lawyer smirked, sensing weakness where there was none. "Honor? Is that why you orchestrated this entire spectacle? To avenge a dog?" The gallery stirred, whispers rippling through the rows. For a moment, Malcolm felt the weight of those eyes, the skepticism, the judgment, but then he remembered Rex. Remembered the sound of the gunshot, the way his loyal companion had collapsed without a sound. His gaze hardened, and when he spoke, every syllable carried the force of a verdict. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was family. He trusted me to protect him, and I failed. But I won't fail again, not now, not ever. The room fell silent, the collective breath of everyone present held captive by the raw emotion in his voice. The lawyer faltered, thrown off balance by Malcolm's composure. Desperate, he launched another attack. "So you admit it, then? This is personal revenge." Malcolm exhaled slowly, his eyes locking onto the lawyer's. "No," he said, his tone colder than ice. "This is justice. If you can't tell the difference, maybe you're in the wrong profession." Gasps echoed through the courtroom, followed by murmurs of disbelief and admiration. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, though his expression remained neutral. As Malcolm settled back into his seat, he felt a flicker of satisfaction, not triumph. Not yet, but the knowledge that he had struck a blow they couldn't recover from. The courtroom's verdict had been a thunderclap, reverberating through the city and shaking the foundations of those who believed themselves untouchable. Calloway and Miller, once kings of their domain, were now shackled prisoners sentenced to 25 years without parole. Justice had been served, or so the world thought. But for Malcolm Hayes, there was no triumph. No catharsis, only an aching void that stretched deeper than any punishment could fill. As the crowd dispersed, some cheering, others whispering, Malcolm stood still, his gaze fixed on the floor. The faces blurred around him, the voices faded into white noise. All he could hear was the echo of Rex's final breaths, the way his body had crumpled under the weight of betrayal. He had won the war, dismantled the corrupt system piece by piece, but victory felt hollow when it came at such a cost. Days later, Malcolm found himself standing before a small headstone nestled beneath a canopy of trees. The rain fell steadily, cold droplets soaking into his jacket as if nature itself mourned alongside him. "Rex, loyal to the end," the inscription read, simple yet profound. Malcolm crouched down, brushing away the wet leaves clinging to the stone. His fingers traced over the letters, each one etched with memories too painful to let go. For hours he sat there, the damp earth seeping through his jeans, the chill biting at his skin. Yet none of it compared to the frost settling in his chest, the gnawing emptiness that whispered louder than the storm above. In the quiet solitude, Malcolm replayed fragments of their life together, the endless walks, the playful barks, the unspoken bond that transcended words. Rex hadn't just been a dog. He had been his anchor, his confidant, the one constant in a chaotic world. And now, all that remained was a grave, a memory, and the crushing realization that justice couldn't resurrect what was lost. Malcolm clenched his fists, not out of anger, but out of despair. Was it worth it? He murmured aloud, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain. The question lingered unanswered, dangling precariously between guilt and resolve. As dusk approached, Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out an old chewed-up toy, its fabric frayed from years of use. It was Rex's favorite, the one he used to carry everywhere, even during their late-night strolls. Malcolm placed it gently atop the grave, his hand trembling slightly. "I promised I'd protect you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "And I failed, but I swear I'll never forget you." The rain intensified, washing over the cemetery like a cleansing tide. Malcolm lingered a moment longer, staring at the makeshift memorial before rising to his feet. His legs felt heavy, as though the past clung to him, unwilling to release its grip. Yet, as he turned to leave, he forced himself to take a step forward, one foot in front of the other, a promise to Rex and to himself that while the scars might remain, they wouldn't define him forever.